Welcome to Demand Gen Confidential, the marketing podcast where we'll be talking with some of the most progressive marketers out there, diving deep into marketing tactics to help you become a better marketer. Let's jump into today's episode. I am curious because when we started chatting about this whole thing, you told me that you and Travis Barker, the drummer of Blink-182, actually have the same tattoo. And I'm curious, like, who got it first? Like, did he mimic you first?
Well,
Because
so
I think both drummers,
no,
right?
so it's the same tattoo, but what I mean is that I have it here on my arm, and he's got it in like on his lower back. His is huge. Mine is just
Oh, got it.
like a smaller version. And so yeah, I was a huge fan and just wanted to kind of used it as like my first tattoo ever. I said, oh, like I admire him. I want to kind of remember because I basically learned to play drums just watching him and his videos. So yeah, it was a kind of like a statement piece for me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in between the two of you, you guys both have how many platinum albums?
Oh yes, of course. I wish my band had platinum albums. We tried. We toured Europe, Russia. It was super fun, like for almost 20 years.
Okay.
But like I wasn't able like to leave my full-time job. It was also one of the reasons why I then stumbled on copywriting. So at least the music produced something useful, which is my current career
Yeah.
in a way.
So your band was big enough to at least tour then.
Yeah. We tried taking a couple of weeks every couple of months here and there, but with a full-time job, it's quite hard, right? So we tried. It was fun, but yeah, it wasn't viable as an enterprise.
Yeah. I mean, I worked with another guy years ago, and he was a guitar player in a band, and I worked at 99 Design Marketplace, and it was kind
Yeah.
of neat because like 3/4 of the company was musicians. They loved karaoke, like they did all this cultural stuff. And he told me, he was like, yeah, we got mildly big. We were touring up and down the West Coast, and you know, you can have kind of like a small mid-sized band, and
Yeah.
it's a lot of fun. But hardly anybody
Yeah, I
makes
think
it big.
I think like I heard actually of a lot of marketers, founders as well who are musicians as well, and I think it's a skill that actually like teaches you a lot about like entrepreneurship, about like building stuff, sharing and promoting your own stuff. Because if you're like a local band or like starting out and you have to kind of build your name, you know that you have to do everything now. Like labels don't do anything for you anymore,
Yeah.
and so you kind of have to yeah, master the tools, try different tactics, see what works, fail, and move forward.
Yeah, I mean, I stumble upon, because I like pop punk. I stumble a lot of YouTubers now, either covering pop punk or doing like really cool stuff, and they're just independent, monkeying around on their own time, and it's
Yeah.
a lot of fun. And I think the creative
Did you
part of
see?
music is also in there, because I had my nieces over this past weekend, and they're kind of considering getting into music, and not like bands and like guitars and drums and stuff, but school music and how to get into the school programs. And I was telling them, like, it's unfortunate that you have to test in to like the drums, and they force them to drum on a click. And I was like, that's actually really hard if you've never actually done it before, like to like have to go to the click, and they didn't get in. And I said, like, the unfortunate thing about school programs is a lot of times they don't teach you how to play the music that you want to listen to, which is like, I played trumpet and then I picked up guitar because I wanted to play punk rock and play the music that I listened to. And so, I
I
think it's such
love
a
it.
big part of, learning as you grow up. But
Yeah, totally. When I'm self-taught, I mean, my dad taught me like the
yeah,
basics, but everything else was just listening to the music I love, trying to play those songs, deconstructing all the drum parts, and messing up at the beginning. Like at the beginning, one of my first drum was actually only a cymbal attached to a cord to a chair,
okay.
and my dad's snare sitting on the chair, and that was my drum set. And so I learned like super rough. And then I got my first drum kit, I think, a couple of years after. But yeah, it was super rough, but I loved it because at least I was playing the music that I love.
Yeah, I mean, that's the biggest thing, and it's, I mean, just playing the songs that you like, and I was telling them that because even if they don't like rock and roll or something like that, you can find somebody who's translated your favorite music into whatever instrument that you want to play. At least now,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, with
totally.
the internet, it's not
Yeah,
so
yeah,
difficult. But
yeah, yeah. Have you tried any of those AI music generators now? That's like my fear is that a lot of people are gonna start using that rather than actually start playing instruments.
I dabbled a little bit. So funny enough, I tried to do one to do the intro to this podcast because I was like, oh, I kind of want to talk about AI tactics during this podcast series that we're doing. I might as well have an intro done by AI. I couldn't figure it out fast
Yeah,
enough that I just went and got a stock intro. But I have a
yeah.
neighbor who's all into it, and he'll sit there and do it to the point
Oh
where
wow.
he does the music and then he throws lyrics into Chat GPT to try and get lyrics to go and then paste them on top of each other and as a
I
joke.
yeah.
But
I've actually I think I found there's a band called, if you are into retro wave kind of electronic
yeah,
music, kind of like electronic 80s like vibes. There's this band called Action Cop,
okay.
and they did an entire album. You can hear that it's AI because I know kind of how it
Yeah,
sounds. And they even their videos, if you go on Instagram, their videos are completely AI made. So they have this whole, which is in a way it's nice because it's like a concept album, like a very like a sci-fi story, so it's enjoyable. But like when you hear like the lyrics, you can hear some of those rhymes that ChatGPT forces. You can hear you can hear some of those patterns that AI uses, which is not great.
yeah. But I mean, some of the AI generated music isn't gonna be much different than normal popular music. Like one of the things that drives
Mm,
me crazy in music is if like you hear it on the album and then you go see somebody live and it's like exactly like listening to the album and it's not raw, there's no mistakes, there's no difference in the songs. Like that's one of the
mm,
things. So there might just end up being a backlash going back to some of the 90s rock styles. Like I'm a big Jack White fan as well, where like he'll tour with two bands, he'll like no set list, all this. There might be just a backlash to that, which would be awesome because
mm.
then you go to the live show and you can only see it there. And that's like
Yeah,
the best
yeah,
part of all of that is to only get to experience what you're doing there rather than it being recorded and being done somewhere else. So
yeah,
maybe we'll get
sure.
something good out of it.
Yeah.
But enough about music. I mean, I could probably talk about it. Like I brought up Jack White, and I could talk about him for the whole hour. But there is marketing stuff that we probably should talk about. I'll do a quick intro, and you can mention anything else that the audience should know about you. So I'm here with Chris from Conversion Alchemy. He's conversion expert using messaging to help B2B companies stand out, improve their conversion rates. And you can check him out at Conversion Alchemy. Chris, anything else that you would like the audience to know about you?
No, I would say I was a software engineer for 10 years, so I transitioned from something completely different. And I got hooked, as I said, trying to escape the matrix and playing music. I got hooked on copywriting and the psychology behind the decision making aspect. And yes, since 2016, 17, this is what I'm doing.
Yeah, an interesting thing. I love the starting with software engineering and getting your way into marketing because as I was kind of coming up in marketing, kind of probably a little around the same time, 2014, 2015, uh, so much of the digital stuff was technical. Like now everything
Mm,
WYSIWYG. And so you kind of like don't really have to know how it works internally, but like at that time it was all WordPress. So like you had to know a little bit of HTML and CSS to be able to get to move your way around. Like you had to know how the scripts on
yeah.
Google Tag Manager work and all of that. So I find it interesting. I had a couple other marketers on the podcast that got their start that way. And there's always a different perspective. You know, it's kind of like when
Mm,
you say GTM, what do you think? And I think Google Tag Manager, and a lot of people now think go to market.
Go to market. Yeah, yeah.
And I don't know
Yeah.
how everybody, like, I haven't put this on LinkedIn yet, but I don't know how salespeople rebranded themselves as go-to-market experts. Like, I was a
Yeah,
sales
yeah.
rep, and so, but
Oh, totally. Yeah, I see that perspective. Like the technicality of my previous career actually helped me. I think not as much with like the web stuff because my type of software engineering was industrial automation, so
yeah,
pretty different, like robots, automatic assembly machines. But the like being in that technical field, I think actually made it easier for me to transition and change and adapt my skills, like learning a lot about UX design, the technicalizing frameworks and systems thinking behind copywriting. So a lot of that I try to, I think, adapt it to the way that I was thinking before as well.
yeah, that's a good point, the systems thinking and that, and, oh, well, I'm gonna transition this into our first question about messaging, but it's almost like one of the things that I'm super interested in about marketing right now is, like, there's this debate that I see a lot around marketing being creative versus, like, the
Mm,
spreadsheet and performance side, and, like, I don't think those should be disparate things. Like, I think we should be trying to make marketing more like science, and I spoke with a scientist on the podcast, and her comment was just, all science is structured observation, and
mm,
structuring what you see out in the world, going out and testing it, and in order to test it, you just have to have some kind of measurement system to do that. And messaging is a lot like that because it's like we observe something, we have to go test a few things, but we do need to see what works. And there is the anecdotal, but there's also a bunch of data backed things that we have to put in there. And with private equity taking a bigger share of the market, especially in B2B
mm.
SaaS, like, I would imagine that as we're looking at messaging, that's something that we probably want to be conscious. And it's not about taking the art away from marketing. It's about, like, just being more science, and science is very creative, at least according to her. And it is. I mean, you have to be somewhat. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
in that, like, for messaging, making it science, like the profitability era, like, what are you seeing in kind of the shifts of how B2B companies are thinking about messaging to make it fit
Mm.
within the profitability frameworks that are being pushed very heavily right now?
Yeah, so probably like one of the like most obvious thing I think, which is I think it's a good shift that needed to happen a long time ago.
Mhm.
It's probably the shift from like feature dump heavy copy, focus on technicalities, aspects, to more of like the business outcomes.
Mhm.
And with the profitability angle, it's even more important, I think, to being able to speak in terms of, okay, what are the business outcomes that this product delivers, right? What are the like kind of the measurable outcomes, and not just what the platform can do, which is a bit more what the like the growth at all costs aspect was promoting. Like, this is new platform, this is the vision that we have for it, right? So now we're more interested in what it can actually do, even if it's not like a revolutionary outcome. The other one is probably that I'm seeing, especially working with a couple of private equity companies on their portfolio SaaS. It's the shift from kind of more generic addressing their audience
Mhm.
to very hyper specific ICP messaging, ICP specific related messaging, and verticals. So a lot of the work that I do, it's helping them understand, okay, what are the specific ICPs, but also what are the use cases that we need to write specific pages for? What are the solutions that we offer? Because those actually get you closer and closer to that ROI again and profitability. The other one is probably there's been a shift, I think, rather actually people are understanding that there's a difference between what you know internally at the company and how your customers actually think and make decisions. So people are starting to align more on their message, the internal message, but also aligning that message to what customers need to see on the page, right? So there's I think the way that I see it, it's like a spectrum. You can have very strong customer alignment, but low specific point of view, internal point of view. But that's kind of like a commodity. You're basically saying what everyone else is saying. Or you can have high, strong point of view, but low customer alignment, which is you're shouting your vision, but it doesn't really align with what people actually want. And when you can actually combine the two, so the customer alignment with your point of view or internal vision, that's when you actually differentiate, because you are telling people, okay, this is our point of view. This is the way that we see things and why we are doing them. And this is how we help you in your specific situation.
Interesting.
What else?
One thing I want
Yeah.
to dive in there a little bit is your internal messaging, like the way you speak as a company being different than how the
Mhm.
customer sees stuff. To be honest, I've been in that situation. Like we launched a whole thing thinking that it was for an
Uh,
entirely different persona, and like backtracking and like how are customers like, or how are people, what have you seen people ingesting the customer to try and like, are people trying to ingest what customers are saying and inject that into their, company culture rather than going off and, their own little tangent?
yeah, I mean, what I'm trying to do is to actually understand what is the conversation that your customers are having
Yeah.
when they
Okay.
land on their website. They're having a conversation in their minds, right? So you need to understand that. What most companies do, it's actually like right from the get-go on the page, you tell people what you do, like without even thinking about what are the motivations that are taking them there, what are the like pain points they're solving or the desired outcomes. And you immediately shout, this is my positioning, this is like what I do and how I do it differently. But that I think comes after. It only can come after you hooked people with the specific message or specific angle that they have in their mind when they land on your website.
Yeah. Okay. And then you had mentioned getting super specific on ICPs and use cases. Like, so when you get granular like that, how do you get granular and also not make it super similar between ICPs and use
Mm.
cases? So like keeping some kind of differentiation there.
Yeah. Yeah, that comes to a lot comes to the actual language that you
Okay.
use. And if you have a chance to speak to all of those different types of ICPs, that's when you can actually gather and collect a lot of the voice of customer and gather examples that they use, specific words, like vivid message that actually what differentiates your page. It's the actual language, the way they speak, the examples that they make. It's not the actual angles that you hit,
Mhm.
because those are the I don't know the 3 4 core messaging pillars that you have, which are should be consistent through across your ICPs. They're just reframed across different lenses. Like consider your ICPs different lenses. Same thing for the use cases or the solutions. So I think that's what differentiates you there. I think it's the actual language, the voice of customer you used, and the examples and use cases that you make. So and that's also why I think it's important to have very specific case studies that actually back all of those claims up for that specific ICP or industry use case, so you can actually have proof to back up your claims.
Okay. So interesting. So, all right. That makes a pretty decent transition to kind of what's the difference between positioning and a messaging strategy. You like kind of hit on the pillars and then taking the pillars of your message and putting them into different ICPs and use cases. Like,
Mm,
I mean, I'm not a product marketer, and like I do messaging and that stuff with the best of them because I came up in sales. So like salespeople are natural product marketers because they figure out what's going to close and hook people. But
yeah.
like when you get into the jargon of positioning or messaging, like all the little nuances, I don't really know what the difference between positioning and a full messaging strategy is. Like what is
Mm.
like what do you see the difference being?
Yeah. So the way that I define the specific bucket, so to me, after the research, which is typically 70% of the process to get to those
Okay.
outputs, then I divide it in positioning, messaging, and copy. So those three elements. Positioning, the way that I define positioning, it's basically, it explains what you do, who you do it for, and how you do it better, uniquely, or differently, right? So it's the what. The messaging, it's how you explain all of that, which to me, the messaging is usually includes the strategic narrative, which is your point of view. So why did you start? What's your unique vision or view on the market that enables you to provide the specific solution that you offer? The messaging strategy to me also includes sales pitches, so different variations of sales pitches that you can use that are based on off of your positioning. It also includes the key messaging pillars that I mentioned before. So those can be usually 3 to 4 different messaging pillars. And the thing about messaging pillars, they are also typically related to what makes you different that you've worked on in the positioning.
Mhm.
So in your positioning, you typically work on those 3, 4 messaging pillars, or how, as April Danforth calls them, the differentiated value themes. And I like to link them to your key messaging pillars. Let's say that you do 2, 3 things in a slightly unique, different way from other companies. What I also tell companies is that they don't need to be like, each of those doesn't need to be unique in absolute sense. What matters, I think, it's the combination of those 3 or 4 elements needs to be unique. So you need to be the only company that offers the combination of those 3, 4 key elements, right?
Yeah.
And in the messaging framework, that's where you actually start to narrate those key pillars. So you write examples of how you frame it in terms of gain, in terms of loss, in terms of benefit, in more of like a logical sequence or as a one-liner. So start to express and explain how you frame those elements from the positioning. The other thing that's part of a messaging framework, it's also the brand voice. So it's also important to differentiate your brand voice and explain what are again, 3, 4, 5 different approaches that you take with your voice. What are the things that you should do in your voice that you shouldn't do? So try to be as clear as possible with that. Sometimes I also do geolocalization. For example, I worked with a company that had like a branch in the US and also UK. So we needed to differentiate the brand voice, especially because it was a very sensitive field, the DEI space.
Mhm.
So diversity, equity, inclusion. As you probably know, the US is a bit of a mess right now. So in the US, we needed to speak a certain way. In the UK, we could still be a bit more flexible. And so we needed to make that clear in the messaging framework.
Yeah.
Yeah, so these are, I think, the main elements. The other one is also defining your category. So in your positioning framework, you simply define, okay, are we creating a new category in a new market? Or are we in an already existing category? Or like, how do we approach that? And in the messaging framework, you create a description for that. So again, positioning is defining the what. Messaging framework, it's more of the how you express it. And then finally, the copy is the actual words, the like fleshing out all of those different frames, all these different variants, and doing it for all your personas.
Yeah. The interesting thing, like, once you got down to the copy in that's probably only like 5% of this whole process.
Yeah, exactly.
Um,
The copy almost writes itself, like once you have all of that.
yeah. So 3 things I want to dive into on each of those is the research part being 70%, point of view, and then how smaller teams can do this. So on the
Mm-hmm.
research part, so you said research is like 70% of this whole process. And I definitely think marketing teams probably don't spend 70% of the time on the research portion of this. Like, what is your advice for people to get focused on the research portion of all of this messaging?
Yeah, so one kind of framework that I use to think about research, I think of it as an iceberg. So you have the part of the iceberg that's outside of the water. That to me is more of like the surface layer.
Yeah.
So everything that you already have access to, which means going on review websites where you can gather language that your audience uses to define competitors or even your product if you have reviews for your product. Or if you have sales call transcripts, all of those are super helpful. And typically, most companies record them. They just the thing is that they mostly just end up in like in a repository or your Google Drive, and everybody forgets about them. But you can actually use them. And or like support chat transcripts is another good one. And even starting to categorize and deconstruct and understand your competitors' messaging just as a reference. So all of those I think make that surface layer the first thing that everybody has access to. The second one is to understand what users do on your website. So more of the UX and experience layer. So for that, I look at a lot of user interaction data. So anything like heat maps, scroll maps to understand how are people engaging with my website, my specific pages, where do they scroll, what do they maybe spend a bit more time on, what do they skim and go through, because it's all data points that tell us how we should optimize our copy and what matters to our users. Or the other thing, you can watch user recordings, which is basically watching your website visitors use your website, and you can actually see their actual experience, their user flow, understand maybe your navigation doesn't help them find what they need. You can run usability testing. So I used to work at a usability testing startup, and I found massive value in just watching how people use either a product or a website, because it actually tells you how much people don't understand unless you're super clear and specific with your messaging, with your specific language. A lot of people might land on your website and you might see them stumble on something that for you it's completely obvious, right? So it's super useful to get into other people's shoes and experience the website or whatever marketing asset in their own shoes. So this is the experience layer. Kind of tells you, okay, how people are using the website. It can also be product data if you have product analytics. That's also helpful. And the final layer, which is probably the most useful, but the kind of hardest to get, there's more friction, I think. It's the deeper layer, which is all about qualitative data. So running customer interviews, and not in the sense of understanding how they use the product or which features they would like to see. What you should understand there, it's more of the before, during, and after of the whole journey that they take. So what drove them to looking for other solutions? What made them switch from their previous solution if they had one? Why did they go for your specific solution? So all of those data points tell you how they make decisions, and you can actually use that data to then write better messaging that addresses specific objections, desired outcomes, motivations, all of those. It's also important to understand like the during. So now they're using the product. What's the biggest problem that they're solving? All of that tells you super helpful information to come up with value propositions that maybe you weren't even thinking about. So again, stepping in other people's shoes. And then like the after, how it's still useful to maybe ask them feedback, how you could improve your experience, their experience, the product in general. So trying to map out that transformation from the before to the after, it's probably the final stage. And at this stage, I would also recommend going on competitors' website and trying to deconstruct their positioning and messaging strategy. And you can actually do it pretty well if you know how a page is written, like the typical structure, and you can use those insights to actually differentiate your content. So yeah, I think of it in terms of more of like a systematic approach, and take, I don't know, the 1 to 3 tactics in each of those 3 layers that you can use, that you have access to, or you have the resources to do, and start there. Like you don't need to do every single thing. And even now with AI, it's even easier to conduct research. So I would say anyone can get started, I think.
Yeah, I think I love all of those examples. I think the AI right at the end absolutely makes research easier for the internet related stuff. One of the things I always think about is the talking to customers or prospects piece, like, how do you scale that? And it's like one of the most difficult things for marketers to do. And I see a lot of LinkedIn people like, oh, you got to talk to your customers. You got to talk to your customers. But the reality is, very few marketers get that opportunity. And the reason being is that
Mm.
companies, there is a long line of people who want to talk to customers that get to jump in front of marketing because they need to work on renewals. They need to deal with customer success onboarding. They need to do all these other things. And so I always like try to think, I'm a big webinars fan, and that's like my access to customers. Like I'm always uh, pretty wanting to do those because that's how I personally you basically get to jump the line. So if you bring a
Mm.
program in marketing where it forces you, but I think finding ways to talk to customers or talk to people is probably definitely in there. It's very, very hard. Like, don't want to downplay it, but it's probably one of the most
Yeah.
important pieces to anecdotally layer on top of all that extra research, I think, because
Mm.
trade shows are also a good place to do it. Like events, people get a lot of access to that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, but those are good research. Research is so tough to do good research. It really is,
Yeah,
I think.
totally. And a couple of other like ways maybe that you can scale
Yeah.
that. One reason that actually comes to mind, it's something that happen to me because I use a lot of different tools, like specifically AI tools.
Mhm.
And this company, they like sent me an email. Okay, hey, we're going to write a couple of case studies. If you participate in a case study, you're gonna have your own like page in our resource center with your link to your company and all the stuff. And I think that was actually a pretty smart way of speaking to me. And I was as we were working on my case study of me using their tool, I gave them a lot of feedback and they asked a lot of questions. So that's also I think like a more of like a sneaky way of speaking to customers, like offering them visibility maybe, especially if you're in B2B for a case study, and also use that as an opportunity to get some social proof for yourself. But other ways, I think even if you don't speak to customers, I think it's important to kind of install a micro feedback gathering systems or tools in at all different touch points. So one is can be like on a thank you page, having a little survey that asks them like even just a simple questions like what now that you signed up for this product, what's the next thing you're gonna do, or what's the main focus or goal that you're trying to solve, right? So all of those can be super helpful to help improve onboarding, for example, and all those next steps, or even just adding a little website poll or survey, depending on the traffic, that asks your visitors kind of to identify themselves, like what brings you to the page today, or on a pricing page, what's preventing you from signing up or buying today. So all of those can be little touch points that you can include that could actually help you scale getting that customer feedback, or at least prospect feedback, since they are still not
Yeah.
customers, that can compound all the research that you do.
Yeah, that's a really good thought process, is just being very intentional and thinking about how you're going to scale research and making
Mm.
that just a big part of your strategy. I like that,
Yeah.
that thought process. Um, I do wanna ask you about point of views, because I think that a lot of companies, and I see messaging in the marketplace, I see companies in the marketplace, they're not willing to have a bold point of view or go against the grain enough. And I'm just
Mm.
curious, like in the positioning messaging framework that you talked about, how do you see companies, or what advice do you have for people to try and go out and have a point of view, or like how important do you think it is?
Yeah, so typically to kind of extract that point of view from my clients, I speak a lot with the founder, or it
Okay.
can be the marketer if it's the very it's a marketer from the beginning. And so they typically clearly have a vision or a unique insight that they're trying to integrate into the product. And so it's all about asking specific questions like what mistakes are you seeing your competitors make and how you solve for that, or what mistakes are you seeing your customers make and how you solve them, or a question that I like to ask it, what's driving you crazy about the industry that you wanted to solve for. So that typically gives you very, sometimes very funny, sometimes very like all the time very vivid language that you can actually use to shape your narrative. Or another one, it's what myths, lies, or misconceptions are you seeing spread around in the industry, and how are you maybe countering them or fighting against them? So all of those questions dig into something that I think not a lot of teams dig into often. And yeah, when you have that narrative, those answers, then it's all about connecting those to how your product fits into the picture, right? And the actual point of view or that insight is what we start from typically when we do our sales pitches, our sales decks. Everything starts from that unique insights, because then you're basically telling people, we are seeing this in the market. Typically, people start solving that in these 3, 4 different ways or with these alternative solutions, but they don't work. Why? And then you explain, and then you jump into, okay, this is our solution. We address all of those points, and this is why we built it, because no one else is doing it, right? So that the differentiation, I think, if you start from that point of view, almost comes natural. Like you don't even have to force it. It's basically just naturally the logical flow from we've seen this, and that's why we built our product.
Yeah, that's interesting. I love the drives you crazy about the industry, because there's many things that drive me crazy about marketing. I'm going to drop a point of view here for you, Chris.
Nice.
Is there's many things that drive me bonkers about it, but one of the ones lately is around, and I'm going to go for it, is intent data. I think it's absolutely bananas what people are willing to buy on intent data without independently testing it. Like there's this
Mm.
whole 6-figure a piece industry of a barber telling you need a haircut thing around intent data without independently testing every single little piece of intent and whether or
Mm.
not you see uplift. And that goes back to my thought around being a scientist in marketing,
Yeah.
because it's just blindly saying like, okay, we're going to ingest all this intent data, wrap it up into a metric, and it's going to work. But we haven't tested if any of that
Yeah.
stuff moves the needle for us. And there's a whole
Yeah.
industry, massive, around this, and it drives me absolutely bonkers. And it's not that it doesn't work. It's that there's blind faith that the black box is going to work for you because the company told you it's going to work that way. And like
Mm-mm.
that,
Yeah, if it worked for someone else, doesn't mean that it's gonna work for you, right? You have to still go to your customers and realize, okay, does this actually fit my specific case and my ICPs?
yeah. Or our motion, like, because different motions are
Mm.
different, like,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
in all of that, there's third party intent data, there's your own website intent data, there's all this stuff. And I get that we're trying to figure all this out, but it's so take it, what drives you crazy about your market, and that can shape your point of view. And I think that's a really,
yeah.
really good one. Sorry, I won't go too far down that rabbit hole, but okay. So moving on a little bit, and you talked about, grabbing research, looking at, feedback along the website as to why didn't you buy or convert today? Like what made you do it today? That in itself is trying to get you some insight into people's decision making. And so
Mm.
you mentioned to me when we were doing the prep for this, you have a decision making philosophy. And to be honest, I haven't spoken to somebody who said, like, I got a decision making philosophy for you. So, Chris, I want to know, like, what in it?
No, what is nerd enough?
Yeah, I mean, but that's the point of the show, is like to get deep into into the weeds of like what makes people tick, like what's the decision making, and
Mm.
being a little bit of a nerd about it. Like, so what is your decision
Yeah.
making philosophy, and like how can other people start to look at it.
Yeah, so the way that I see it, I think in general, it's a very good approach or mindset that you can put yourself in whenever you write copy or
Mhm.
think about how to structure any page or marketing asset. It's to consider that you're not actually selling a product. If you think about it, you're selling a decision. And what I mean by that is that every user experience on our website, or even just reading your email, or people looking at your sales deck when you present it, it's all about a set of tiny commitments and micro decisions that they need to take while they're experiencing whatever they're experiencing or reading, right? So imagine someone looks at your page, and even before clicking on your primary call to action, which can be book a demo or sign up, in their minds, and this is from like experience speaking to people, looking at how people use websites and interact with them, even before clicking on the final call to action, they are experiencing or thinking about things like, is this for someone like me? Do they understand my whole world? Do I trust this specific claim? Should I keep reading? What happens if I'm wrong? Right? So all of those are little tiny commitments that they have to go through and that your copy needs to address for them. So when you start thinking about these little aspects, first you pay more attention to every single word that you write, and it goes back to the first copywriter like Claude Hopkins in the 1920s. They were saying like each word should deserve its weight or its place on the page. I think we should still go back to those fundamentals, and I think this approach kind of helps you put yourself in that mindset. And yeah, so this is kind of the overall mindset behind it. As far as how people make decisions on a website, I always like to reference a very, very easy and direct framework that I like. I've learned it when I started out on the Mac Labs Institute, I think they're called,
Mhm.
yes. And they have this very specific, it's actually like a heuristic framework. And they have these three or actually four components. So the first one is motivation. So what brings people to a page? Could be purchase prompts, desired outcomes, or triggers. The second is the value. So, what is the value that they are trying to extract from your product that they want to get to, right? So, the features, benefits, all of those.
Mhm.
The final is the anxiety. What are they anxious or about, or what are they doubting? What are they hesitating on? Maybe switching costs because they're already using another tool. So, those three make the foundation of your page typically. So, motivation, value, anxiety, and finally the call to action area. When you start seeing every page from the lens of these three, four areas that you need to kind of push them through, it makes it easier for you to understand, okay, in this, at the beginning of the page, what's the motivation? What's driving them here? I need to address that. What's the value that they need to see after we match their motivation, and how we move them through their anxieties for this specific goal that they need to achieve here on this page. So I think that's a pretty useful and practical framework that anyone can use to first write their own copy, but also to deconstruct any other page or competitor website that they are trying to understand.
Interesting. There was the tiny commitments piece in there. So I don't know, like in marketing literature and marketers, I haven't seen anybody talk this way. And actually, I don't see a lot of modern sales stuff talk this way. But when I did my sales training, 15 some odd years ago, a big portion of it was getting prospects as you're talking to people to say yes to little things
Mhm.
along. Then, because then it becomes really difficult for them psychologically to say no all of a sudden.
Yeah.
Like, it's little mind tricks, right? But that's the tiny commitments thing, is figuring out ways for them to nod along. And, I really liked that piece and connecting it back to, my sales days, and just something that I realize I haven't seen that much lately in a
Mm.
lot of, like, getting people to say yes along the way. I mean, maybe people now feel it's a little manipulative, but I like classic
Yeah. I
literature.
mean, as long as you do it. the right way, and you
Yeah.
approach it in like you can make people say yes, I think, but because you want them to get the value that they are looking for, right? It's not saying yes to trick them.
Yeah, exactly. That's the point. And your
Yeah.
your solution is going to solve their problems.
I think what you are fighting against there with like to using those yeses or addressing those yeses, it's you're fighting against the natural friction that people have whenever they land on a new product that they don't know almost anything
Yeah.
about, right? So there's going to be some friction, and you want to bring those barriers down for them so that they can see the full picture and understand, okay, is this for me or not? If it's not for them, they're free to go. You're not taking them hostage.
Yeah, that's good advice. Taking down the friction is a good one. All right. Closing it out, not fully closing it out, but I want to hear, you said you use a lot of AI tools. Curious, what are some tactics that you recommend people in marketing use for AI? Like, I know it's kind of a hot topic in marketing right now, but I think it's a good tool and people shouldn't be nervous to dive in. Like,
Yeah.
what things do you think people should be doing?
Yeah, so probably the main advice is to once you have or are starting to collect some of those materials, like we mentioned, the positioning canvas or the messaging framework, start to like actually collect official documents, categorize all of that data and insights into some form of like specific documents that you can use. Once you have that, that actually becomes the context that your AI can use to actually write or strategize on messaging and write the copy. And the thing that I like to do, it's for my clients, or even just I did that for myself for my business lately. I created all those documents, the positioning, messaging, value proposition canvas, even a sales pitch, kind of a storyboard for my sales decks. I like to take all of those documents and create a project, so a specific project, whether you do it in Claude or in ChatGPT. What I found, Claude is probably the best one in terms of writing, at least. It doesn't have those annoying AI verbiage things that ChatGPT often has that you can find and spot easily on a LinkedIn, for example. So Claude is a good one. The unfortunate thing is that it's got like a very limited amount of responses, especially if like in my case, you're writing a lot of copy. So what I like to do, which I think it's probably even better than using the commercial Claude app, is to use third-party apps that connect to the Anthropic's API, and you can basically write copy using the API. So you don't pay a subscription; you basically pay per response, but it's pretty cheap, especially if you're at a company or like in a big team. And the other advantage is that you can also collaborate with your team using the same exact documents, same exact frameworks and voice. Everything is standardized because you're in the same project working together. You can even look at the same chats that people are working on, right? And or continue other people's work. So that's super valuable. I've been using it with my junior copywriter. A good tool for that, it's Team GPT, it's called. There's another one called Typing Mind that basically allows for the same thing, and you can get their team plans. And yeah, I think that's probably one of the biggest like wins, I think, in terms of using AI for messaging and writing. It's gather your strategy documents and start collaborating on those using specific tools or projects.
Yeah. What are the clear tells that people are using AI from like ChatGPT? Like, I know initially it was M dashes and everybody's like all debating the M.
Yeah.
I never learned how to use M dashes, so I typically don't, but I
Yeah,
usually
I actually have a theory
use
about
the
that. Yeah,
comma sandwich was my version of M
yeah, yeah,
dashes. But like,
yeah.
what are the
So
tells?
I have a theory. I have a theory about M dashes, which is we are stopping to use M dashes. AI is going to slowly absorb the new way of writing without M dashes. And so people are going to use AI without M dashes, and then we're going to start reintroducing M dashes to differentiate in the next 20, 30 years.
Yeah, that is probably going to happen. Yes. But all these things come
Yeah,
back
yeah.
and come back and come
Yeah,
forth.
it's like a cycle. But yeah, other things that I typically see that are easy to spot are, I mean, the capital letters in a headline typically, or the classic framework or like formula that you see, like it's not about X, it's about Y. Those like
Oh,
things that ChatGPT repeats over and over and over. ChatGPT lately, I don't know if it's the 4.0 model only, but it typically writes very short sentences, and people who are not really great at like editing their own AI generated copy, they just paste it like that, and you can basically like a LinkedIn post now looks almost like a poem, like like super short sentences stacked on top of each other, and that's kind of like a pretty clear sign of that. Other things,
that
yeah,
one's
another.
unfortunate because on the short sentences one, so I did a bunch of writing work, you know, right before the 2020 period, and I trained myself to write in shorter sentences and to be a little choppier and a little punchier. And I went to because there was this whole copywriting trend then that it was every sentence has its own line, and like I would write emails that way and all this stuff. And it's unfortunate that that's now becoming an AI tell, because it was like actually a pretty good strategy then, and I don't really want to have to go back to long sentences per se, but
Yeah,
I'll keep that in mind.
yeah. Another thing, it's I don't know how to explain it, but it uses this contrast formula when like it says something is this, it's not like another specific word that's totally contrasting the first word that you use. I don't know how to explain it, but you literally see it's kind of it's more of like an abstraction of concept that ChatGPT tries to do, probably because if you ask it for to write us a topic and you don't provide a lot of context, it tends to abstract a lot of the messaging that you want to express just because it doesn't have the detail
Yeah.
or enough detail on it. And so that's another probably another sign probably that I see.
Yeah. I'm coming into this camp now, like everybody's saying like, oh, it's clear all this stuff's written by AI or whatever. But I'm trying to figure out, like, are people writing with AI or are they not writing with AI and they're just bad writers? Like, that's the one thing to
Yeah.
appreciate. Not to be
I think probably,
mean, but
yeah.
yeah.
Unfortunately, I think the barrier to entry is so low that a lot of people are using AI probably the wrong way.
Yeah. Well, good. I do want to be conscious of time, Chris, but is there any other things that you would like to leave the audience with advice? I feel like what are the tales of AI is going to be a really good, really interesting for people to now learn or go improve their
Yeah.
usage of it.
Yeah, I think probably another idea that I'm planting in your mind right now, if without going into super deep into it, is the idea of synthetic research,
Okay.
which is basically, I don't know if how many people heard of it, but it's starting to pop up. And I've spoke to a lot of founders who actually own some of these synthetic research platforms, which is basically building your customer personas with AI
Mhm.
and using those AI personas to either conduct research if you can speak with customers at the beginning, or even test some of your messaging or ads. And it's becoming pretty interesting because with even, for example, APIs, you can start like imagine connecting your marketing messaging with, for example, you have a lot of different ads, messages for ads. You put them out, you see the results, but then at the same time, you also test them with synthetic personas, and you always get the winners out of them, and you only actually launch the winners. And the interesting thing is that maybe AI personas can't get you to that 100% accuracy, but even a 70% accurate without having to conduct real research, which takes time, it's expensive. It's a really good starting point if you think about it. So yeah, maybe people can start looking into it and start thinking about it. But I think it's got quite a lot of potential, especially if to build those AI personas, you use real human research.
Yeah. That's a really good one. You know what, Chris? We might have to just do, like, I feel kind of bad that we left this AI thing to the end. Might have to do a round two just on all this AI stuff, because like that's the cool stuff. Like that's the stuff that makes launching new things so interesting, is things like that where you can get 0 to 70% fast and very cost effectively. And then you can start
Mm,
doing the really hard work of finishing and polishing it up. Rather than
yeah.
the 0 to 1 section, which can be also equally hard. But
Mm-mm.
yeah, any other items? Otherwise, we can close this out.
No, I loved it. Thanks so much for the conversation. I
Yeah.
love every single question.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Chris. I think there's a lot of great stuff in here. I'm just looking down at my notes. I mean, the moving away from feature heavy, going to pain points, spending a lot of time on your research, and just dabbling with AI and avoiding some AI trends, key things, is a lot of good stuff. So with that, I will leave us there. Chris, where should people go to connect with you?
Yeah, you can find me on my website, conversionalchemy.net, where I have a scorecard that you can try and kind of gives you an idea of like where you stand in terms of copy messaging. And on LinkedIn, I'm usually there posting stuff, chatting with people. So yeah,
All right. We'll link that in the show notes and go connect with Chris. Awesome. Well, thanks a lot and enjoy the
awesome.
rest of your day.
Thank you so much.